Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we are opening up a file on a figure who is, well, he's a bit of a paradox, really.
That's a great way to put it, a total paradox.
Because if you go to India, specifically to Bengal, this man he's everywhere. Absolutely everywhere.
So it's almost impossible to overstate his presence there. He's not just a famous figure, he is the cultural bedrock.
Exactly. His songs are the soundtrack of daily life. His face is on the walls. He is like the air people breathe. But then you come here to the West, and if he's remembered at all, it's usually as this mystical robed figure.
The sage from the East.
Right. A guy who wrote some nice spiritual poems about 100 years ago and then sort of faded away.
Which is a classic case of being, lost in translation, or maybe more accurately, lost in image. Because the man we're discussing today, Rabindranath Tagore, was so much more than a mystic.
So much more.
If you look at the stack of research and sources we have today, he looks more like a one-man renaissance. I mean, he was a modernizer, a rebel, a scientist, and a really sharp political critic.
And just to set the stakes for you right off the bat, to give you a sense of the sheer scale of this guy's influence, I have to drop this trivia nugget because it genuinely blew my mind.
It's a good one.
We are talking about the only person in human history to have written the national anthems for two different independent countries.
That is correct. He wrote Jana Gana Mana for India.
Right.
And Amar Shonar Bangla for Bangladesh.
And the notes say there's a third connection.
Yes, the national anthem of Sri Lanka. Now, Tagore didn't write the final version himself, but the lyrics and the music were heavily, and I mean heavily, inspired by his work.
So he didn't write it, but it was his style.
Exactly. It was written by a student of his, Ananda Samarakun, who was just deeply influenced by the Tagore style of music and poetry. So his fingerprints are effectively on three national anthems.
That is a serious resume. I mean, most artists are lucky to get a hit single. This guy defined the national identity for a huge chunk of the Asian continent.
Right.
But our mission today isn't just to list his achievements. We want to peel back that static image of the Gurudev, the bearded wise man, and find the human underneath.
Yeah, because the sources paint a picture of someone who is radical, sometimes contradictory, and honestly, fascinatingly modern.
So to do that, we have to look at the whole picture.
The novelist, the playwright, the composer.
The painter, the philosopher, the social reformer.
And the educationist. It's a huge list.
It's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
So let's rewind the clock. We are going back to 19th century Calcutta.
Specifically to the Jorasanko mansion.
The notes describe this place, the Jorasanko Sakurbari, as less of a house and more of a cultural fortress.
That's a really good way to put it. This was the ancestral home of the Tagore family. And you have to understand, the Tagores weren't just some rich family. They were at the absolute forefront of what historians call the Bengal Renaissance.
So this house was a hive.
A hive is the perfect word. A hive of what? Everything. Literature, politics, music, religious reform. I mean, you have to imagine a house where there were theater rehearsals happening in the courtyard.
Okay.
Classical music recitals in the living rooms, and literary magazines being published right there in the study. It was an explosion of creativity.
So young Rabindranath is born into this chaotic brilliance. He's the youngest of 13 surviving children.
13?
That's a massive family.
It is, but despite all the chaos and the culture, his childhood was actually quite isolated.
How so?
Well, his mother, Sarada Devi, passed away when he was very young, and his father, Devendranath Tagore, was this formidable philosopher and religious leader. They called him the Maharshi, or great sage, and he spent most of his time traveling.
The Himalayas, right?
Mostly, yeah. So he was a very distant figure.
So who raised him?
The servants, mostly. This was a common dynamic in wealthy households of that era, sometimes called a servocracy.
That sounds like a recipe for a lonely kid.
It was, but it also gave him a strange kind of freedom. He was observing everything from the sidelines, often confined to certain quarters of the massive house. He became a watcher. But there was one thing in his early life that he didn't just dislike. He actively, deeply hated it.
School.
He loathed it with a passion.
The notes mention he lasted exactly one day at Presidency College.
Yeah.
One day. Can you imagine?
He walked in, took a look around, and walked right back out. He found formal education to be suffocating, just utterly soul-crushing.
He compared it to a factory, didn't he?
A factory or a prison. He felt it was designed to crush the natural curiosity of a child, forcing them to sit still in rows and just memorize dead facts.
He actually wrote a satire about this later in his life, The Parrot's Training.
Yes, and it's a brilliant, dark piece of writing that really gives you insight into his philosophy on education.
So what's the story?
Well, the story is about a king who wants to educate a parrot. He wants the best for this bird. So he hires all these scholars and goldsmiths. They build a magnificent golden cage for it. They hire scribes to copy textbooks onto beautiful pages. It's all very grand.
And what happens to the bird?
The scholars proceed to force-feed the pages of the books into the bird's mouth.
Wait, literally, they're stuffing paper down the bird's throat.
Literally, they are ramming the pages in with a rod. They call it education. They congratulate themselves on the sheer volume of learning the bird is consuming.
That's horrifying.
It is. And eventually, of course, the bird dies. It stops singing. It stops hopping. It just lies there on its side with a belly full of paper. And when the king asks how the bird is doing, his nephew proudly says his education is complete.
Wow. That is a brutal metaphor for rote learning.
It's as brutal as it gets. And that was Tagore's view. He believed that the British-style education system in India was killing the spirit of Indian children, filling them with dead facts instead of living wisdom. He thought it completely disconnected them from their environment.
Okay, so if he rejects the school system, how does he become this polymath genius? I mean, he didn't just sit around playing with sticks all day, right?
Far from it. This wasn't a rejection of learning, it was a rejection of schooling. His education was taken over by his older brother, Rabindranath.
And this was different.
Oh, completely. This is where we see the discipline. This wasn't just read what you want. It was a rigorous boot camp, both physical and intellectual.
I'm looking at the schedule here. Wrestling, judo, swimming in the Ganges. This sounds intense.
It was. He had to be up before dawn. He practiced wrestling and gymnastics to build his body. He swam in the Ganges River every day. Then he would study anatomy, history, geography, Sanskrit.
And English, too?
Yes, though ironically, English was his least favorite subject at the time. He really struggled with it initially.
That is ironic, considering he eventually wins the Nobel Prize for works he himself translated into English. But the real turning point, the moment where Rabi, the boy, starts to become Tagore, the thinker, seems to be this trip he took when he was 11.
The Himalayan journey. This is absolutely the call to adventure moment in his hero's journey. It's 1873. He's just had his Upanayan, his coming-of-age ceremony, and his father, Rabindranath, decides to take him along on his travels.
So he gets out of the house.
He gets out of the claustrophobia of the Calcutta mansion and goes out into the vastness of India.
And their first major stop was the Golden Temple in Amritsar.
They did stop there. And this is such a key detail. Tagore would sit in the temple complex with his father for hours, just listening to the Gurbani, the Sikh devotional singing, that immersion in spiritual music day after day that planted the seeds for his own musical compositions, the Rabindra Sangeets, later on. He saw faith not as a rigid set of rules in a book, but as a living, breathing song.
And then from there, they go up into the mountains.
Up to Dalhousie, a hill station in the Himalayas. And there, surrounded by these massive snow-capped peaks, the boy was finally given intellectual freedom.
His father changed his approach.
Completely. He stopped treating him like a child and started treating him like a student, an equal. He was encouraged to read biographies of Benjamin Franklin. He studied astronomy under the clear night sky, with his father pointing out the constellations.
So that connection to nature seems to be the big takeaway here.
Absolutely. He saw the sheer scale of the universe, that vastness, that direct connection between the human spirit and the natural world. That feeling never left him. It becomes the absolute heartbeat of his poetry. He realized that true education happens when you are face-to-face with the universe, not shut up in a classroom.
So he comes back from the mountains. He's a teenager now, full of confidence, and he decides to pull a prank.
Chuckle. Yes. This is one of my favorite stories about him because it shows he had this mischievous streak and a significant ego.
Okay, what happened?
At age 16, he wrote a series of poems, but he didn't publish them as Rabindranath Tagore.
He used a pseudonym, Binu Simha.
Which translates to Sunlion.
Sunlion, that's a great name.
It's a clever play on his own name. Rabi means sun, and Indra is the king of gods, often associated with a lion. But the real trick was the language he used.
It wasn't modern Bengali.
No, he wrote in a Maithili dialect, perfectly mimicking the style of a 17th century Vaishnava poet. He was essentially forging a lost classic.
No way.
Yes. He released these poems claiming they were a rediscovered manuscript from an ancient poet he'd found. And the literary authorities of Calcutta, they completely fell for it.
They actually bought it.
Hook, line, and sinker. Scholars were analyzing these lost works of Banu Sima, praising their archaic beauty and historical significance. A PhD thesis was even written on it later in Germany.
You're kidding? A PhD thesis on his fake poems?
On his fake poems. Imagine the satisfaction of a 16-year-old watching these stuffy professors fawn over something he just wrote in his bedroom.
That's incredible.
It proved his mastery. It showed he wasn't just a modern writer. He had so deeply absorbed the entire history of the language that he could replicate it perfectly. When he eventually revealed the prank, there were quite a few red faces.
It was me all along. That's just brilliant. But let's fast forward a bit. He gets married, he starts a family, and then he enters what the notes call his Satana period. This is the 1890s. And the setting here changes dramatically.
It really does.
He's not in the city mansion and he's not in the mountains.
No, he's on a boat.
A houseboat.
His father, as a sort of management training, I suppose, put him in charge of managing the vast ancestral estates in Shalaidaha, which is now in Bangladesh. So for years, Tagore lived on a family barge called the Padma, just floating down the river system of rural Bengal.
Now, for a rich city kid, an aristocrat, this must have been a massive culture shock.
It was an awakening. It was a complete awakening. For the first time in his life, this aristocrat was coming face to face with the reality of rural India. He wasn't just looking at the scenery from a distance. He was interacting with the tenants, the villagers, the farmers.
He saw what he called the voluptuous poverty of the countryside. That's a striking phrase.
It is, isn't it? Voluptuous poverty. It means poverty that is teeming with life, with stories, with humanity, but also with immense suffering. He saw the struggles, the small joys, the complex lives of people who were completely invisible to the urban elite in Calcutta.
And this experience is where he basically invents the Bengali short story.
He does. The collection is called Galpagutsha. Before this, a lot of literature in that region was about mythology, gods and kings and epics. Tagore started writing about the postmaster, the fruit seller, the child bride, the runaway.
There's that famous story, Kabuliwala.
A classic. It's about a friendship between a rough, burly Afghan fruit seller, a Kabuliwala, and a little Bengali girl named Minnie.
I think I've read this one.
The fruit seller sees his own daughter, who he's left behind in Afghanistan, in Minnie. It's an incredibly human story. It just breaks down all these barriers of class, religion, geography.
And the Hungry Stones.
That's a fantastic one. It's a kind of ghost story, or maybe more a psychological thriller, about a tax collector living in a haunted palace. But even in his supernatural stories, the focus is always on human psychology, on emotion.
So this period on the river really grounded his mysticism. He wasn't just looking up at the stars anymore. He was looking at the people on the riverbanks.
Exactly. It gave his work a pulse. It gave him an understanding of the common person that would later fuel his politics and his social reforms. But here's the thing. While he was becoming a superstar in Bengal, the rest of the world still had no idea who he was.
Right. Which brings us to the very unlikely sequence of events that leads to the Nobel Prize. How do we get from a houseboat in Bangladesh to the stage in Stockholm?
Well, it really starts with a simple notebook. It's 1912. Tagore is 51 years old. He's taking a sea voyage to London, partly for health reasons. He's ill, he's tired. And to pass the time on the ship, he starts, almost casually, translating some of his own Bengali poems into English.
And these were the poems that would become Gitanjali, or song offerings.
That's right. He gets to London, and he shares this notebook with an artist friend of his, William Rothenstein. Rothenstein reads them and is just completely floored. He's so moved that he shows the notebook to W.B. Yeats.
The W.B. Yeats.
Yeah.
The giant of Irish poetry.
The very same. And Yeats completely loses his mind over it.
Really?
He was entranced. Yeats wrote the introduction to the first published version. He talked about carrying the manuscript around with him on trains and buses, almost afraid to close it lest someone see how deeply moved he was.
That's incredible praise.
He called the poetry profoundly sensitive, fresh, and beautiful.
And Ezra Pound was involved too, right? Another huge modernist figure.
Yes, Ezra Pound also championed him. The India Society in London published a limited edition. The momentum just built incredibly fast. And then in November 1913, just a year after he started those translations on the boat, the telegram arrives.
He's won.
Rabindranath Tagore has won the Nobel Prize in Literature.
He was the first non-European to win it. That must have been a seismic shock to the literary world.
It was huge. It completely shattered the assumption that great literature was a purely European domain. It put modern Indian literature on the global map instantly. But, and here's the nuance we really need to get into, the West fell in love with a specific version of Tagore,
The mystic.
Exactly, the mystic. You have to remember the timing. This is 1913. Europe is teetering on the brink of World War I. There's immense anxiety. Industrialization is rampaging. People feel spiritually hollow.
And suddenly here comes this figure from the East.
Right, looking like a biblical prophet with the long beard and the robes, speaking of peace, nature, and the soul.
They projected all of their own needs onto him. They wanted a spiritual healer, not a complex writer.
They absolutely did. And for a while, Tagore played the role. He went on tours, he gave lectures on spirituality. But this fame, this image, it became a double-edged sword. As the years went on, the Mystic Sage Act got old for the Western critics.
The notes mention a backlash.
A huge backlash. As Europe entered the gritty, cynical, modernist post-war years, Tagore's sweetness and spirituality started to feel, well, out of place. Graham Greene later said he doubted anyone took Tagore seriously anymore.
Wow.
And even Yeats, the man who carried the manuscript on the bus, eventually turned on him.
What happened with Yeats? What did he say?
It was brutal. Yeats criticized Tagore's later English translations, which Tagore insisted on doing himself. He called them sentimental rubbish. And then he delivered the killing blow. He said, "Tagore does not know English."
Ouch. That is a harsh pivot from his biggest champion.
It's a complete 180. And the tragedy was that Tagore kept translating his own work into English, but he often stripped out the muscle, the wit, the earthiness, and the complexity to fit that spiritual expectation the West had of him.
So the West was getting a watered-down version.
A very watered-down version. So the West stopped reading him, but in Bengal, his reputation never wavered for a second because they were reading the original, vigorous, complex text. They knew the real Tagore.
So the West saw a soft saint. But at home, he was actually a sharp, sometimes biting social critic. Which brings us to his politics. This section of the outline is titled, "The Knight Who Said No."
And this is so critical. If you think Tagore was just writing songs about flowers and, God, you're missing the fire, he was deeply political, but in a very complex and, for many people, a very contradictory way.
Because he was an anti-nationalist in an era of rising nationalism.
The ultimate paradox.
Wait, okay, so we mentioned he wrote the anthems lionizing the land, but he hated nationalism. That seems like a massive contradiction to the modern ear. How does that work?
It is the central paradox of his political life. Tagore made a very sharp distinction between patriotism and nationalism.
Good.
He believed in loving one's culture and people. That's patriotism. He was a great patriot. But he believed nationalism, the worship of the nation state, the idea that my country is better than yours and I must hate my neighbor to love my country, was a poison.
He called it a dark chasm of aloofness.
He saw what nationalism was doing in Europe. It was fueling the engines of World War I. He didn't want India to just trade British imperialism for a rigid, violent Indian nationalism. He feared that in the quest to kick out the British, India might lose its soul to hatred and exclusion.
He even wrote a novel about this, right? Ger Bear, The Home in the World.
A brilliant, and at the time, very controversial novel. It depicts a charismatic revolutionary leader named Sandeep, who is fiery and patriotic, but also deeply manipulative and cynical.
And he incites violence.
He ends up inciting communal violence and hatred, all in the name of the nation. And there's another character, Nikhilesh, who represents Tagore's view. Someone who tries to do good work quietly, constructively, without the flashy slogans and the hatred.
I can imagine that didn't go over well with some people.
The novel was a warning. And it made a lot of people in the independence movement very angry with him. They felt he was betraying the cause, dampening the revolutionary spirit.
You can't say he was pro-British. I mean, the man renounced his knighthood.
And this is one of his most famous and powerful acts. In 1915, King George V knighted him. He was Sir Rabindranath Tagore.
A huge honor.
But in 1919, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened.
Right. And just to refresh for you listening, this is when British troops under General Dyer fired on a peaceful, unarmed crowd in Amritsar, killing hundreds of civilians, including women and children.
A truly horrific event. It shook the foundation of British moral authority in India. And Tagore's response wasn't a poem, it wasn't a song, it was a letter.
A scathing letter.
A scathing, furious letter to the Viceroy, Lord Chelmsford. He returned the knighthood.
I have the key quote here. It still gives me chills. He wrote, "The time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in their incongruous context of humiliation."
I mean, that is just a masterclass in diplomatic insults. He's essentially saying, your honor is an insult to me when you treat my people like animals. He wanted to stand, as he said, shorn of all special distinctions by the side of his countrymen. It was a powerful political statement that reverberated around the world.
So he stands up to the British Empire. But he also stood up to the other giant of Indian history, Mahatma Gandhi.
This is one of the great intellectual friendships and rivalries of the 20th century. They had immense respect for each other, but they disagreed profoundly.
I didn't know this, but the notes say Tagore was actually the one who conferred the title Mahatma, great soul, on Gandhi.
Yes, he was. Tagore gave him that title, but they disagreed on almost everything regarding how to achieve independence.
The notes mention the cult of the charkha. What was that about?
Right. So Gandhi famously promoted the charkha, the spinning wheel, as a central symbol of self-reliance. He wanted every Indian to spend time each day spinning their own cloth khadi to boycott British textiles.
He saw it as a spiritual and economic discipline.
Exactly.
And Tagore disagreed.
Tagore thought this was dangerously backward-looking. He famously wrote an essay called The Cult of the Charkha. He asked, can we really spin our way to Swaraj independence?
He wanted a different path.
He wanted science, technology, and modern education. He felt that telling everyone to sit and spin thread was a retreat into a medieval mindset. He said something like, I will not buy a spinning wheel, I will buy a tractor. He wanted India to move forward, not backward.
Wow. But the biggest clash, and this one really highlights Tagore's commitment to rationalism, was about the Bihar earthquake in 1934.
This is a defining moment.
What happened?
A massive earthquake hit the state of Bihar, killing thousands. It was an immense natural tragedy. Gandhi, in a public statement, said that this was divine retribution, punishment from God, for the sin of untouchability and caste oppression in India.
Whoa, wait. Gandhi, the political leader, said the earthquake was God punishing people for the caste system.
He did. He was using it to make a moral point, trying to shame people into dropping caste prejudice. But Tagore was furious, absolutely furious.
And he called him out on it.
Publicly, he rebuked Gandhi. He wrote that it was unscientific, irrational, and ignominious to link cosmic phenomena like tectonic shifts to social problems. He found it deeply troubling.
He stood up for reason against superstition, even when that superstition was being used for what you could call a good cause, like fighting caste.
Exactly. For Tagore, freedom wasn't just political independence from the British. It was freedom of the mind. Freedom from fear, from superstition, from what he called narrow domestic walls. He didn't want a free India that was still enslaved by irrationality.
Which leads perfectly into his great project as an educator. He didn't just criticize the system, he actually went and built a new one.
He absolutely put his money where his mouth was. He took his Nobel Prize money, his book royalties, everything he had, and he built a school.
In Santiniketan.
Which means abode of peace.
And this wasn't like the parrots training schools he hated as a kid.
The complete opposite. The guiding principle was no walls.
No walls.
Literally, classes were held outside, under the trees. He wanted students to be in direct, constant contact with nature. He believed the environment itself was the greatest teacher, and things like music and art were just as important as math and science.
And then it grew from a school into a university, Visva-Bharati.
The name is so significant. Visva means world, Bharati implies India, or learning, and the motto was, where the world makes a home in a single nest.
That's beautiful.
It was his dream. He wanted it to be a place where the East and West could meet as equals and learn from each other. He invited scholars from Europe, from China, from Japan. He didn't want India to be isolated intellectually. He wanted a true cross-pollination of cultures.
It sounds incredibly idealistic. Did it work?
Intellectually, yes. It became a legendary cultural hub. It produced incredible minds like the great filmmaker Satyajit Ray and the Nobel-winning economist Amartya Sen.
But financially?
Financially, it was a constant disaster. Tagore spent the rest of his life constantly traveling, lecturing, putting on plays, basically fundraising just to keep the school open. He called it his heavy vessel that he had to drag along behind him. He was sacrificing his own health and his writing time just to fund this dream of a world university.
Speaking of traveling and trying new things, we have to talk about him becoming a painter at age 60.
Yes. This is the amazing late bloomer section of his life. Most people are thinking about retiring at 60. Tagore starts a completely new and very radical artistic career.
And the origin story of his art is so cool. It started with doodles in his manuscripts.
He did. He would be writing poetry, and when he crossed out a word or a line, he wouldn't just scratch it out messily. He would start connecting the crossed out lines, turning the erasure into a rhythmic pattern, and then that pattern would evolve into a strange beast or a haunting face.
So his art was literally born from his mistakes.
Precisely. It bubbled up from his subconscious. And because he was likely red-green colorblind, his color schemes were very unusual. Strange, dark, moody outlines, very modern. It looked nothing like the traditional, beautiful Indian art of the time.
And the reception wasn't what you'd expect for a mystic poet.
Not at all. His paintings were exhibited in Paris and Berlin. They were seen as raw, primitive, expressionistic. In fact, in 1937, the Nazis in Germany removed his work from museums, classifying it as degenerate art.
Well, I feel like if the Nazis hate your art, you're probably doing something right.
Chuckle. That's a pretty good rule of thumb, isn't it? It shows that his work had this disturbing modern power. It wasn't just pretty pastoral scenes, it was deeply psychological.
He was also traveling the world like a maniac in his later years. Over 30 countries, the notes say.
He was really the world's first global cultural ambassador. He went to Iran, Iraq, Japan, all over Europe, the U.S., South America. He was trying to stitch the world together through dialogue.
And he met everyone. There's a very famous conversation with Einstein, right?
1930. Tagore and Einstein met in Berlin, and they had this incredible debate about the nature of reality. It's fascinating to read because you have the supreme scientist and the supreme poet going head-to-head on the biggest questions.
What was the crux of the argument?
Well, Einstein, as the physicist, believed in an objective reality independent of the human observer, that the table is there, whether we look at it or not. The universe exists outside of us.
The scientific view.
Right. And Tagore, the philosopher-poet, argued that reality is fundamentally defined by human perception, that truth is a relationship between the mind and the universe. He said, if there be no human observer involved, the particular harmony of the universe ceases to exist.
That is a heavy conversation for an afternoon chat.
It is. It actually touches on the core paradoxes of quantum mechanics. And reports say Einstein was actually more baffled by Tagore's argument than the other way around. But despite the disagreement, they apparently bonded over a shared love of music.
But not all his meetings went so well. We do have to address the Mussolini incident.
This is the most controversial bit of his travels. In 1926, he visited Italy, and he was, initially, quite charmed by Mussolini. He praised his massive vigor and the sense of organization he seemed to bring.
Oof, that has aged very poorly.
It did. Tagore was, you could argue, politically naive about European fascism at that point. He saw the energy and the discipline, not the underlying brutality. He was treated like royalty there, and he didn't see the oppression happening in the streets.
But he realized his mistake.
Right.
He didn't stick with that view.
No, and this is key. Once he left Italy, friends like the French writer Romain Rolland explained the reality of fascist brutality to him. They showed him the evidence.
And he didn't double down.
Not at all. He publicly denounced Mussolini. He admitted he was wrong and had been misled. He wrote a letter to the Manchester Guardian clarifying his stance. He was never afraid to change his mind when presented with new facts, which shows his integrity.
He also visited Iran.
Yes, in 1932, at the invitation of Reza Shah Pahlavi, he celebrated the shared Aryan heritage of India and Iran. He was constantly looking for these kinds of cultural connections, for a pan-Asian identity to counter European colonialism.
So we come to the end. It's 1941. He's 80 years old.
He died in the very same Jorasanko mansion where he was born. The circle closed. He was in immense pain at the end from a botched surgery, but the poetry he wrote on his deathbed is considered some of his finest. It stripped away all the ornamentation. It was just pure, raw essence.
And his legacy, I mean, obviously the anthems. That's monumental.
The anthems, yes, but also over 2,000 songs. The genre of Rabindranath Sangeet, which are still the absolute lifeblood of Bengal. You cannot walk down a street in Kolkata without hearing one of his songs.
Right.
He modernized the language. He essentially created the Bengali short story. He built a university. He fundamentally changed how an entire culture sees itself and the world.
But there is one very weird postscript to his story that we have to mention. The theft.
Ah, yes. The bizarre heist of 2004. Thieves broke into the museum vault at his university, Visva-Bharati.
And they stole the Nobel Prize medal, the actual gold medal.
They did. They stole the gold medal, his father's watch, some jewelry. The police investigated for years, but the original medal has never been recovered. It's one of the great unsolved mysteries of modern India.
That is just tragic and so strange.
It is. The Nobel Committee eventually sent 2 replicas, one in gold and one in bronze. But in a strange way, Tagore might have found it darkly funny. He always said that material awards were burdens. He was the one who wrote that he wanted to be shorn of all special distinctions.
Be careful what you wish for, I guess.
Indeed. But the thief couldn't steal the words. And in the end, that's what really matters.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final thought? When we strip away the beard and the robes and the stolen Nobel medal, what do we have?
I think we have a man who championed what he called universal humanism. In a world that is today increasingly fractured by borders, by nationalism, by us versus them thinking, Tagore's voice is more relevant than ever.
He didn't want India to be isolated. He didn't want the West to be dominant.
He wanted a table where everyone could sit as equals.
His famous prayer was for a place where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls.
That's the line, that's his legacy. And if
Yeah.
you've never listened to a Rabindranath Sangeet or read Gitanjali, don't just take our word for it. Go find a good modern translation and listen to the voice that tried to bridge the world.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening and stay curious.